I'm still thinking about belief, so I want to try to run some ideas through some models just to see how far I can get. And it's really partly in response to a comment by Laura Layla where she invites us to think about the relationship between the belief, as we've been discussing it, and a distinction that's often made between theory and practice. I mean, when I first saw that comment, my first response was, oh yeah, well, kind of practice correlates with a kind of tacit, intuitive set of understandings, whereas theory perhaps correlates with something more distanced, more explicit, more out there, more reflective. But I'm not sure if that's the case, really. So the way I'm thinking of it right now is really in relationship to, not so much to, well, it is in relation to belief, but it's in relation to the literature about knowledge. Because, you know, I don't know that much about belief, but I know quite a bit about knowledge. And I know that lots have been written about knowledge, which also applies, I suspect. And perhaps it's appropriate because, you know, knowledge is just a kind of belief, right? It's just a belief which have been judged to be justified and true, which just opens up another can of worms about what constitutes justification and what processes you arrive at to turn a belief to, you know, to validate a belief as true. But either way, belief is just, knowledge is just a kind of belief, so I think we can use the same model. And the words I've been using for some of this is tacit and explicit. And I'm using those terms come from a writer called Michael Polanyi in a book called The Tacit Dimension, I think. But he's written about it elsewhere as well. And they're widespread. You know, they've almost entered the public vocabulary now, tacit knowledge and explicit knowledge. Particularly because they got picked up on by people who are kind of in the knowledge industry, people in business more than anything else, with the idea of trying to capture tacit knowledge. Because if you're in a business and you've got workers who've gained expertise in certain areas, they've been working there for a long time, it's quite likely that they'll know things which are not, you know, written down anywhere. You know, they're not part of the training of the job. They just know stuff. You'll be familiar with that, I'm sure. And in fact, they'll know stuff without really even knowing that they know it quite often. They'll just know how to do things. They'll know efficient shortcuts. They'll know, you know, ways of speeding the job up. They'll know workarounds. You know, all these kind of things which people who have got expertise in a particular area know about. And that, in Polanyi and another writer since, is kind of tacit knowledge. And as I say, people who in industry who wanted to maximise profits, that kind of thing, spent a lot of time trying to figure out, you know, how you could capture that tacit knowledge. Because obviously, if a person's been working in industry for 20 years, gained all this tacit knowledge, and then leaves, you've lost a lot of stuff. So how do you capture that so you can pass it on to the next generation? So that's some of the reasons why tacit and explicit knowledge became popular and entered the literature. And there's lots of other knowledge binaries which work like that. I can't think of any of them offhand, but I'll put a list below. And they all have that same kind of form. There's an understanding of knowledge or an understanding of belief which is explicit. You know, you can put it in words, you can pass it on, you can write it in a book, you can make a video expressing it, you know, those kind of things, draw a diagram of it. And then there's those beliefs or knowledge structures which don't lend themselves to that, or it would never occur to you to try to put those into language. Those are more tacit. And in the terms I've been talking about, these would be the tacit in kind of implicit ones would be corresponding to beliefs or intuitively held beliefs possibly. And the more explicit ones would be corresponding to, you know, traditional beliefs, what I've been calling reflective beliefs, ones that you can put into words, or perhaps even start as words. Perhaps they start as kind of scriptural texts that you are invited to believe, or they start as science textbooks that you're invited to accept. But either way, they start in the explicit realm out there, and either do or do not enter the implicit realm of the tacit, the felt. There are journeys that go the other way as well. Perhaps there's another video to be made about that. But anyway, sorry, that's a long introduction to talk about the theory practice thing. Because as I say, when I read Laura Layla's comment, my first thought was, oh well, tacit beliefs are perhaps correspond with with practice, and this reflective beliefs perhaps correspond with theory. So if I know how to juggle, for example, or if I know juggling, there'll be some of that knowledge which is tacit. You know, I've got it. It's in my joints. It's in my muscles. It's in some patterns in my neural assemblies, whatever. And then there's some explicit stuff in which, you know, I could look at diagrams on the page about how to hold your hands. I can perhaps know a little bit about the physics of projectiles in flight, all those kind of things. Explicit stuff. And I'm working between these two forms. So on the face of it, I thought, as I say, this is the thing and this is the other thing. But thinking again, I'm not so sure. I'm just not so sure, because there are ways of organising knowledge, and in this case belief, which is not into that simple binary of the A-leaves and B-leaves, the tacit and the explicit, the intuitive and the reflective. There are, you know, kind of other models, and one of the models that I like quite a lot, and it comes from an educationalist called David Perkins. And as I say, he's talking about knowledge, not belief, but I think the terms can translate. He says that rather than using two, he's got a third term. He's got what he calls possessive knowledge, which would kind of correspond to reflective. It's kind of out there. It's you could kind of touch it almost. You can certainly state it and make it explicit. Battle of Hastings 1066. There it is. It's out there. I can say it. I can write it down. And he also has this more or less corresponding to tacit one, which he calls a proactive, which is much more dispositional. It's a way of feeling. It's a way of being in the world, an approach as well. But between them, he has this thing called performative, which I really liked. And performative is all about kind of application. It's about the kind of doing of knowing. You know what I mean? The doing of how you know stuff. So if I can return to the juggling example, you know, juggling, the theory of juggling, in the one hand, might be, yes, it's those diagrams in juggling manuals about how to hold your hands, and yes, it's the physics of parabolas. But theory, in a sense, could also be that those structures of knowing that you have in your body, you know, their potentials, their kind of algorithms perhaps, or their heuristics about what to do with your hand, those kind of things. But there's a kind of theory, isn't it? And between these, you have the performative knowledge, which would be the actual practice of juggling. You know, that form of knowledge comes alive in the actual doing of it. Yeah, you're performing the knowledge, so it's performative knowledge in Perkins. And I think that maybe the same thing is true perhaps in belief. You know, you have these explicitly held beliefs, you know, which might be scriptural, or, you know, kind of faith-based, or might be scientific and empirically based. And then you get and there's clearly theories here. And then you have these, and I know I'm playing slightly fast and loose with the word theory, I apologise for that, but explicit statements, let's say. And then you have these internal feelings, these dispositions, these potentials, kind of intuitive feelings, which might enable you to move in certain ways. But between these beliefs, you have practices, don't you? Which in scientific terms might resolve down to, you know, what you do in laboratories. There's some really interesting stuff actually been written about laboratory activity as kinds of performance. I might refer to that at some point. Good stuff. You know, where the beliefs are performed and tested, but there's a performance going on. They're actual alive there. And in religious terms, you know, there's observances, isn't there? In which the belief doesn't exist in this kind, well, it does exist in this kind of theoretical scriptural form, and of course it does exist in this felt form. But in some religions, and I think Judaism is one of these, Laura Lady might be able to confirm this, you know, Judaism puts a lot of emphasis not on the scriptural text, although yes, it's important, and not on this kind of dispositional feeling of belief, but on the actual, on the doing of it, you know, on the following of religious observances, the you know, belief in action, belief in practice. So I think there's something interesting about that between the distance kind of explicit out there kind of, yeah, that kind of belief, and between that and this implicit, felt, internal, intuitive, dispositional form of belief, there's this kind of performative belief, a kind of belief of the hand. It's the kind of tactile, haptic belief, as opposed to the really internal, felt sense and a really distant, almost visual sense, the beliefs that you see at a distance and can make explicit. Anyway, that'll do. It's 10 minutes. That's long enough, isn't it? Thank you very much for your patience and attention.